All right, guys, we are starting a new unit today, and this unit I kind of custom created. So chapter 10 was the last chapter of our textbook, but it's real important now in these last two units. So we'll do one on inequalities. This one will take about 3 weeks, and then 2 weeks. And then we'll do one on factoring, and this is designed specifically to get you ready for Algebra 1. All right, so this is kind of our launch between pre-algebra and Algebra 1 to give you guys a good head start. All right, so inequalities day 1 is really just going to be kind of like a warm-up to what is an inequality and what's the difference between inequalities and equations. So when you're making an equation or when you're solving an equation, it's important that you remember that equations have one very specific solution, like x equals 5 or x equals 10. So there's only one answer in an equation. But with an inequality and with some real-world situations, they require the possibility of more than one solution. So that's why inequalities are necessary. Okay, so I just want you to think for a minute, maybe pause the video, just think for a minute, what is a situation in real life where there would be possibly more than one solution that would be acceptable? All right, so I'm going to start off with an example. The age of voting. Okay, so how old do you need to be to vote? It's 18, right? So a real life situation where more than one solution makes sense, well, is there more than one age that's an acceptable voting age, right? You can be 20, that's at least 18. You can be 25, you can be 30, and you could list off a bunch of ages, right? That would make that situation make sense. So height limits. If you go to an amusement park and you want to ride a ride, most of the time you have to be 48 inches tall. Well, if you're 50 inches tall, then you're good. If you're 52 inches, 54, 60, and you could give several solutions that would be acceptable. So that's where inequalities kind of draw this line that as long as it's more than or less than that amount, then it's going to be acceptable. So that's really what it's trying to warm you up to. It's not you have to be exactly 18 to vote. That would be like an equation, okay? If there's only one answer, it's no, you can be at least 18. So all of the ages over 18 would be acceptable. That's an inequality. All right, so this is like a really basic, just simple warm-up. And what we're going to do is we're just going to compare these values. All right, this comparison is just warming us up to the less than and greater than concept. All right, so you really could probably just pause it here and answer all of these before I even explain them, right? So 4 and 4 equals, right? Yeah, they're the same value. 7, is that greater than or less than -2? All right, you should say greater than. Now, just as a review, greater than opens up, the mouth opens towards the bigger number. All right, so -5 is less than. So again, my mouth is open towards the bigger number. What about 4? It's greater than -3, right? 3 and -6. 3 should be greater. And 4, -1. 4 should be greater. All right, so just getting into the practice of greater than and less than. Okay, so now we're going to take a minute and we're going to rewind to all the way back to chapter 1. But as you can see, these equations are a little more detailed than just your basic one-step equation. there's a lot of combining like terms that we have to do in order to solve this. All right, so let's just look at the first equation right here. 16 plus x equals 5x. So the first thing I notice is that I have a variable on both sides of the equation. Do you remember which variable you want to move to the other side of the equation? Which one would you want to move? Okay, if you say the smaller of the two, that's what we learned in class, but we also wouldn't want to move 5x over here because that's loading everything on the left side of the equation. That's kind of defeating the purpose. So we want to subtract x to the other side. Remember, that gets it to cancel out to the other side. So I bring down my 16 equals what's 5x minus x. All right, if you say 4x, that's correct because remember there's an understood 1 in front of the x. And now just real basic. Divide both sides by 4 and x equals 4. You say, well, I thought this was an inequalities lesson. It is, but we solve inequalities the same way that we solve equations. So by reviewing equations, it's actually warming us up to solve inequalities. All right, so over in this next problem, I see a lot of x's. All right, but it's important that we see, here's my equal sign. So first we want to see, are there any terms on the same side of the equation that can be combined? All right, and if you see your x's, if that's kind of jumping out at you, you're right. So negative 2 plus 13 is 11. 8 plus 11x equals x minus 2. And now if you remember back to what I said on the first example, my preference is when I have variables on both sides of the equation to move the smaller of the two values. All right, so that would mean x is smaller, so I would subtract x to the left side. All right, so basically I'm moving my x's to the left side. So now I have 8 plus, what's 11 minus 1x, 10x equals negative 2. Okay, so now if I need to get my x by itself, what can I do with my 8? If you're saying subtract it, you're right. Okay, so now I have 10x equals, what's negative 2 minus 8? It's negative 10. Okay, all right, so I'm out of room, so I'm just going to bring this over here. 10x equals negative 10. And now last step, divide by 10, both sides. X equals negative 1. All right. Okay, so I want you to pause the video right now and just see if you can work these bottom two problems. All right, just see if you can get a jump start on it and solve them before I explain it. All right, so on this bottom problem, again, I see variables on both sides of the equation. So you can see which concept I'm really trying to review with you guys. It's getting those variables on the same side of the equation. So which one would you move? Would you move the 4t or would you move the 6t? All right, so I'm going to kind of go with that same concept. I want to move the smaller of the two, which would be 4. And I get negative 17 equals 5 plus 2t, because 6t minus 4t. All right, so now what do I do? If I'm subtracting 5, that would be correct. Negative 17 minus 5, remember that same sign, add and keep. So that would be negative 22. All right, if you're thinking this does not seem like a new concept, you would be right, because you've already learned this year. But what we're doing is we're trying to tie in something that you've already learned into something that you are going to learn in the next lessons. So negative 22 divided by 2 is negative 11. All right, last problem. Remember we want to move the smaller of the two, so how do I get p to cancel? I subtract it. P minus p cancels, and I minus p to the other side. Okay, I just want to get those variables on the same side of the equation. So now I have 3p plus 10 equals negative 14. Subtract 10 to the other side. 3p equals, same sign, add and keep, negative 24. Last step, divide both sides by 3, and p equals negative 8. All right, so hopefully you followed along, and hopefully you caught on to really some of those concepts that we were trying to review, getting your variables on the same side of the equation, solving for x, combining your like terms, and all of those concepts are going to be important as we move into your other lessons for inequalities. Let's see. Okay, so just to kind of finish things up, we have 2 more problems. And again, it's just kind of going along with that same concept. So because we've done 4 together at this point, I really want you to try to do these 2 on your own. So go ahead and pause real quick and just work these last 2 problems. Okay, so we want to get our variables on the same side of the equation, so we're going to move our smaller variable by adding 4r to the other side, and we get negative 11 equals 18r plus 9. All right, and what do you think you'd do next? If you're saying to subtract 9, you're correct. And we get negative 20 equals 18r. Divide both sides by 18, and this is the first time we see that our answer is not going to be a whole number. All right, that's okay. What I want you to do is just reduce the fraction. Negative 10 over 9, because I can reduce by 2, equals r. Okay, and you can leave it a fraction, that's perfectly fine. All right, last problem. Did you catch that there were like terms on the left side of the equation? So because there are like terms, you should be combining them. Negative 1w minus 1w is negative 2w plus 3 equals 7 minus 4w. So remember, which one is the smaller value? They're negative, which means that negative 4w is farther from 0, so that's the smaller value. All right, so I'm canceling it out because I'm trying to get my w's on the same side of the equation. So now I have 2w plus 3 equals 7. Now, subtract 3 to the other side, and you get 2w equals 4, and divide both sides by 2, and w equals 2. All right. Okay, so that kind of wraps up our day 1 lesson. Just, I know it was more of a focus on equations, and you'll see how that starts to tie in, but why it's really, really important, especially as we are getting ready to promote you guys to Algebra 1, why solving equations is one of the most important concepts that you can take away from pre-algebra. All right, so that's going to wrap up our first lesson for our inequalities unit.